The tower swayed slightly when the wind picked up. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to remind you that you were sitting in a structure held together by bolts and angles, suspended 75 feet above a forest floor you couldn't quite see through all the trees. I'd been up here alone for 6 hours, and so far the only movement I'd detected was a family of deer at approximately 3 o'clock, slowly moving through a clearing 2 miles southeast. I'd logged it. 3 does, 1 fawn. Standard late afternoon activity. The radio beside my chair was a constant presence, a black rectangular anchor to the world below, and so far it had been blessedly quiet. Just the occasional check-in from dispatch in Redding, confirmations from the other tower operators scattered across Northern California's fire country, and one ranger requesting permission to access the Northern Access Road. Routine, predictable. Exactly what I'd signed up for when I'd committed to this isolated 48-hour shift. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been a Firewatch operator for 7 seasons. Most people imagine this job as some kind of transcendent communion with nature, sitting in a tower high above the world, watching the landscape like a guardian. In reality, it's mostly boredom punctuated by adrenaline spikes, and the kind of physical monotony that makes your lower back ache by hour 4. You scan methodically. You map coordinates. You learn to distinguish between dust and smoke, between machinery and forest movement. You spend a lot of time alone with your thoughts. During peak fire season, which is right now in August, towers like mine are staffed continuously. The tower sits at 4,200 feet on a ridge that overlooks approximately 50,000 acres of mixed conifer forest, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, incense cedar, and tin oak. The nearest town is Bernie, 15 miles away. The nearest other person is probably whatever ranger is patrolling the district, which could be anywhere from 5 miles to 50 miles away, depending on the day. I arrived at the tower at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, carrying 2 days' worth of food, water, coffee, a sleeping bag rated for mountain nights, and the peculiar resignation that comes with volunteering to be completely alone. The ladder access was a little rough. The tower had been built in 1976, and neither it nor the ladder had been lovingly maintained. But I made it up to the observation cabin without incident. The cabin is small, maybe 12 feet on a side, arches with windows facing all 4 cardinal directions, and one window facing up for some reason, which faces clouds most of the time. There's a fire detection instrument called an Osborne Fire Finder, which is basically a circular map on a stand that lets you triangulate smoke and fire locations from your vantage point. There's a radio with a backup battery, there's a logbook, there's a small desk, there's a chair, there's a bunk with a thin mattress. It's the kind of space that's perfectly functional and thoroughly depressing at the same time. I'd furnished it with personal items over the years: a photograph of my sister in Seattle, a small succulent that somehow survived, a small portable speaker that picked up exactly 2 radio stations if you positioned it correctly. By 7 a.m., I'd completed the initial scan and made my first log entry. Invisibility excellent, no smoke detected. Wind current from the northwest at approximately 12 miles per hour. Temperature 58 degrees and rising. I made coffee on the small camping stove and settled into my routine. Firewatch is a job of incremental attention. You don't watch the entire forest simultaneously. That would be neurologically impossible and psychologically devastating. Instead, you divide the landscape into quadrants and you rotate through them. 20 minutes to the north, focusing on the ridgeline where fires often start and spread quickly. 20 minutes to the east, watching the more protected valleys where fires can smolder undetected for hours. 20 minutes to the south, where the forest becomes denser and the sight lines become compromised. 20 minutes to the west, in where the terrain flattens slightly and where access roads make human activity more likely. Then you repeat. The Osborne Firefinder helps with this. You can take bearings on potential smoke and calculate distance, but mostly you rely on pattern recognition and experience. You learn what normal looks like, and you watch for deviations. The first shift of a fire watch is always the longest. Your body is still on the rhythm of normal life. You're adjusting to the altitude, the isolation, the quality of light. The forest below looks infinite and manageable at the same time. You can see the individual trees in the closest clearings, but from 100 acres out, everything blurs into texture. I spent the morning doing desk work, updating the logbook, checking the radio batteries, or reviewing the emergency procedures, even though I'd reviewed them approximately 400 times previously. Around noon, I heated up a can of chili on the camping stove and ate it looking north toward a distant ridge where a wildfire had burned 3 years ago. You could still see the scar, the lighter coloring of regenerating forest, mixed with the blackened trunks of the trees that hadn't survived the initial burn. It was a reminder of why the job mattered. Fire doesn't care about schedules or intentions. It doesn't respect boundaries or property lines. It moves according to fuel and weather and terrain, and the only thing between it and someone's house, sometimes, is a person sitting in a tower, watching for the first sign of smoke. Around 2 p.m., I noticed something odd in the southwest quadrant. Not smoke, movement, in just a momentary shift in the forest canopy, approximately 2 miles out. I immediately grabbed the Osborne Firefinder and took a bearing. The azimuth read approximately 235 degrees. Using the map overlay, I estimated the location at roughly 4.2 miles out in a canyon where 3 seasonal creeks intersected. I logged it. Possible large animal movement, possibly vehicle on Service Road 7. I continued scanning. The movement didn't repeat, and after 15 minutes, I moved on. This was normal. Forests are full of movement if you're paying attention. Wind moves the upper canopies in ways that can look deliberate from a distance. Water flows. Rocks shift slightly as they settle. What looks like a person moving through the trees from a tower can be a fallen branch, rolling downslope, or a section of tree crown doing something unexpected in the wind. You learn to accept a certain threshold of ambiguity. The afternoon passed. The sun tracked west. The shadows lengthened and the forest took on that golden quality it has before evening when the light becomes almost liquid. I stayed alert through the 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. window, because that's when fire danger tends to peak. The temperature is at its daily maximum, the humidity at its minimum, and the sun is still strong enough to provide ignition energy, but low enough that sight lines become compromised. At 4:47 p.m., the radio came to life. "All stations, this is dispatch," a female voice said. She sounded tired. Dispatch is usually tired, like we have a report of possible activity on the East Ridge. Marcus, you have eyes on Sector 492? Sector 492 is the official designation for my eastern quadrant. I immediately rotated my focus in that direction. "Dispatch, Tower 1," I responded using my official designation. "I'm scanning Sector 492 now. Visual confirmed clear. No smoke, no movement. Visibility excellent." "Copy, Tower 1. Report came in from a hiker. Possible campfire approximately 3 miles northeast of your position. Would have started around 3 p.m. local." I scanned more carefully. The northeast sector is where the forest becomes particularly dense, where sightlines degrade, and where smoke can easily dissipate in the afternoon thermals. 3 miles northeast would place the fire approximately in the area of Cascade Lakes. It's where there are several unmarked camping areas and where people sometimes venture without permits. I raised the binoculars and performed a more systematic scan. The Osborne Firefinder gave me another tool. I could take a bearing on the reported location and use that to triangulate from my position. The math suggested the fire, if it existed, would be in a canyon system that I could only partially see due to the ridge obscuring my line of sight. "Dispatch, I'm scanning the area," I said carefully. "It's possible there could be a fire in Cascade Lakes Canyon, where I can't achieve full line of sight. The ridge blocks my view of the main basin. I'm not detecting smoke at my vantage point, but that doesn't mean there isn't a fire below the ridge line." Dispatch crackled back. "Copy, Tower 1. Can you get higher and look over the ridge?" This is the moment when being in a fire watch tower actually becomes complicated. The tower is already high. The way to see over the ridge would be to climb up on the exterior observation platform that's mounted on the roof of the cabin, which means descending the interior ladder, exiting the cabin, and climbing an exterior ladder that consists of metal rungs bolted to the exterior of the tower structure. It's not particularly dangerous, but it's not comfortable either. At 4,200 feet elevation, on the side of a mountain, with a metal structure moving slightly in the wind, it's the kind of activity that reminds you that you're not at ground level. I did it anyway. I locked the cabin door, habit, climbed out the interior exit, and began ascending the exterior ladder, when the wind was more pronounced at this height. The tower was moving in a way that was perceptible, manageable. From the observation platform, I could finally see into the Cascade Lakes basin. And there was nothing. No smoke, no fire, no movement, no sign of human activity whatsoever. The basin looked empty and peaceful and entirely undisturbed. "Dispatch, Tower 1, I reported from the exterior platform, my voice slightly strained from the altitude and the effort of climbing. "No visual confirmation of fire in Cascade Lakes basin. No smoke detected. Basin appears clear." There was a longer pause than usual. "Copy, Tower 1. Stand by. We're checking the hiker report now." I waited on the observation platform, holding the exterior railing, my binoculars in one hand. The wind was cool at this altitude, and it felt good after being inside the cabin. The forest spread out in all directions. An ocean of green and brown and the particular shade of gray-green that conifers take on in late afternoon light. From up here, the landscape felt bigger and more real than it did from inside the cabin. You could see the curve of ridges, the patterns of water flow in the canyons, the way roads cut through the forest like scars. You could also see how enormous the landscape was. 50,000 acres. That's about 78 square miles. You could fit a small city in that space. You could hide almost anything. "Tower 1, dispatch," the radio crackled. "False alarm on the hiker report." The individual called back and clarified they were reporting a campfire from 2 days ago that they saw while hiking. No current fire. I felt the slight deflation of adrenaline that comes with a false alarm. Copy, dispatch. Tower 1 standing down. I climbed back down the exterior ladder, re-entered the cabin, and locked the door again. The whole incident took maybe 20 minutes. I made a note in the logbook, noting the false report and the time of the all clear. This happens occasionally. Hikers see things. They misremember timing. They report old fires or fires that don't exist. Or they're testing the system. I've never understood why anyone would do that. But I've seen it happen. I settled back into my chair, made another cup of coffee, and returned to my systematic scan of the 4 quadrants. The sun set at 8:43 p.m. The transition from day to night in the mountains happens faster than it does at lower elevations, and by 9 p.m., the landscape had shifted entirely. Night vision takes a while to develop, but once your eyes adjust, you can see a surprising amount by moonlight. The forest becomes a landscape of shadows and highlighted ridges. The sky becomes deeper. The stars become visible. Fire danger doesn't technically end at night, but it becomes less likely. The temperature drops, the humidity increases, and the fuel becomes less volatile. Night watch is more about preparing for the next day and staying alert for any sign of human activity, particularly emergency situations like car accidents on the roads that cut through the forest. I did my evening routine, checking the radio batteries, reviewing the day's logs, ensuring I had water and food accessible through the night. Around 10 p.m., I tried the small camping stove again, heating water for tea, and the cabin was starting to get cold. At night, at 4,200 feet, it gets cold fast. I was on my second cup of chamomile tea, thinking about sleep, when the radio crackled to life again. Tower 1, this is dispatch. You receiving? I picked up the radio handset. Tower 1 receiving, dispatch. Go ahead. The voice on the other end was different this time. Not the tired dispatcher from earlier, but a man's voice. Older sounding. Authoritative. Tower 1, we have a report of possible unauthorized persons in the forest below your location. Report came in approximately 10 minutes ago from a ranger on patrol. The ranger is requesting that you maintain observation and report any movement or activity. Over. I felt something shift in my attention. Unauthorized persons. That's one of those things you hear about in briefings but don't expect to actually encounter. People do sometimes venture into forest land without permits, or they venture into areas that are technically restricted. Sometimes it's teenagers looking for places to party. Sometimes it's people interested in geocaching or photography. Sometimes it's worse. Poaching, for example, or people involved in illegal activities that use remote forest locations as staging areas. Tower 1 copy, I responded, keeping my voice steady and professional. Can you provide location of sighting and time of report? Over. Stand by, dispatch said. There was a pause of maybe 30 seconds, during which I could hear background radio chatter. Then the voice came back. Tower 1, the ranger reported movement approximately 2 miles south-southwest of your position, approximately 1985 hours, possibly heading west toward the Creek Canyon. Over. I was already moving. I rotated my chair toward the south, grabbed the Osborne firefinder, and began taking a bearing on the location. 1985 hours would be 7:45 p.m., about 2 hours ago. 2 miles south-southwest would place them in the lower canyon system, in the area of Cascade Creek. Tower 1 copy, I acknowledged. Beginning systematic scan of south and southwest sectors. Will report any visual confirmation. Over. I didn't see anything. The forest in that direction looked the same as it always did. Dark shapes of trees against a slightly lighter sky, the silhouettes of ridges, the void where the canyons descended. But didn't see anything wasn't entirely helpful. Archie's because I was looking at square miles of landscape in darkness, and a person or a group of people could be moving through that landscape at ground level, completely invisible to someone looking down from above. I increased my scan intensity. Rather than the usual 20-minute rotation cycle, I began concentrating on the south and southwest quadrants, 10 minutes per quadrant, looking for movement, looking for light, looking for anything that suggested human presence. Nothing presented itself. The forest continued to look like a forest. The darkness continued to be dark. The radio remained quiet. Around 11 p.m., I decided to attempt sleep, rotating my chair toward the cabin interior and setting the chair to recline slightly. I left the radio at full volume and positioned it on the desk next to the chair. Sechis, this is the standard procedure. You don't truly sleep during a fire watch shift. You rest, remaining in a state of alertness where you can respond to radio calls and emergency alerts. I managed maybe an hour of partial sleep before waking, returning to the scanning routine. Midnight came and went. The forest remained still. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. At 2:47 a.m., the radio crackled. I snapped awake immediately, my hand moving to the handset. Tower 1, dispatch, you receiving? Tower 1 receiving, dispatch, go ahead, I said, my voice still rough with interrupted sleep. Tower 1, we have another report of possible activity in the forest below your position. Ranger patrolling the west sector reported hearing something approximately 1 hour ago, approximately 3 miles west, near the old mining road. Activity description: unidentified sounds, possibly voices. Ranger is maintaining position but requesting that you maintain observation. Over. 3 miles west, near the old mining road. That would place them in territory I could see, but barely. The old mining road is a barely maintained Forest Service road that cuts through some of the more remote areas. It's not really used anymore, but it's still technically there, and occasionally people discover it. Hikers sometimes use it as an access point. Tower 1 copy, I said. We'll begin systematic scan of West Sector. Over. I was properly awake now. Any remnants of sleep had burned away completely. I positioned myself at the west-facing window and began scanning the west quadrant with more care than before. The old mining road is visible as a slightly lighter line running through the forest. Distinguishable because the vegetation is lower where the road has cleared trees. I traced it with my eyes, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of lights or activity. The forest was silent. The road appeared empty. An hour before 2:47 a.m. would have been approximately 1:47 a.m. People don't typically hike at that hour. They do, however, sometimes conduct activities they don't want to be discovered doing at that hour. Tower 1. Negative visual on reported activity in West Sector, I reported. The old mining road appears clear from my vantage point. Visibility compromised in lower valleys due to terrain features. Activity could be present below ridge line without visual confirmation. Over. Copy, Tower 1. Dispatch came back. Let's continue observation. Rangers are investigating. Tower 1 copy. Maintaining observation. I settled into the chair facing west, and I waited. The night continued. The stars continued their slow rotation. The forest continued to be a landscape of shadows and shapes. I don't know if I dozed or if I was, perfectly alert for all of it, but time took on that elastic quality it has at night, when 1 hour can feel like 20 minutes, or an entire night can vanish in what feels like moments. Around 5 a.m., I made another cup of coffee. My body was running on fumes, but that's how Firewatch shifts work. You don't really sleep. You accumulate fatigue and you keep functioning. The sun would come up in roughly an hour. The day shift would begin, officially at 6 a.m. And though, of course, nothing changes at an arbitrary time, the sun rises whenever it rises, and the forest remains as it is, indifferent to the human concept of shift changes. Dawn broke around 6:17 a.m. The forest transitioned from darkness to shadow to a kind of gray illumination, where the individual trees became visible again. I performed a full scan of all 4 quadrants, looking for any indication of overnight activity, disturbed undergrowth, campfire remnants, abandoned equipment, footprints, anything that would indicate human presence. I saw nothing obvious. The forest appeared unchanged. I made an entry in the logbook documenting the night watch, the reports from dispatch, my observations, and my conclusions. No visual confirmation of unauthorized activity, like though absence of visual confirmation doesn't necessarily indicate absence of activity. The forest is large. Darkness is comprehensive. People can move through it without being seen if they're careful. At 6 a.m., I was expecting either a check-in from dispatch or some kind of shift change information. Instead, what I got was a radio call from a ranger. I recognized the voice. It was Park Ranger Patricia Castillo, whom I'd met once at a training session several years ago. She sounded concerned. Tower 1, this is Ranger Castillo. We found something I think you need to know about. My stomach tightened slightly. We've found something is not the beginning of a normal conversation. Tower 1 receiving, Ranger Castillo. Go ahead, I said. We found camp remnants approximately 2 miles southwest of your position. Ike near Cascade Creek, she said. Evidence suggests the camp has been occupied for some time. Multiple fires, constructed shelter, indication of extended occupation. We're doing a preliminary investigation, but I'm calling because the camp is directly in your line of sight from the tower, and I don't want you to be concerned if you observe additional activity. We'll be conducting a thorough inspection of the site. Over. I felt something cold move through my chest, directly in my line of sight. I'd been scanning that area repeatedly over the last several hours, and I hadn't seen any evidence of occupation. Not a hint of smoke, not a flicker of light. Nothing. Tower 1 copy, I said carefully. Can you provide specific coordinates for the camp location? Over. She provided the coordinates. I plotted them on the Osborne Firefinder. E.g., the location was indeed within my sight range. It was, in fact, in an area I'd scanned at least 5 times during the night. Tower 1, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been maintaining continuous observation of that sector since receiving report of unauthorized persons at 2:47 a.m. this morning. I saw no indication of occupation, no light, no smoke, no movement. I'm uncertain how camp activity could be present without visual confirmation. Over. There was a pause on the other end, longer than would be accounted for by simple radio delay. Tower 1, your observation is noted. The camp appears to have been established prior to your shift beginning. Can you provide confirmation of light or fire activity in that sector after the report was received? Over. I reviewed what I'd observed. After the report about activity near the old mining road, I'd concentrated my observation on that sector for a while. Then I'd scattered my attention across the other quadrants. I'd returned to the south-southwest sector multiple times, and I'd seen nothing. No light, no smoke, no fire, no indication of human presence. Tower 1, negative on light or fire activity, I reported. After the 2:47 a.m. report, I maintained systematic observation of reported sectors. No visual confirmation of activity. Over. Copy, Tower 1. The campsite will remain under ranger observation throughout the day. Maintain your normal watch. Ranger operations will not affect your duties. Over. Tower 1 copy. Maintaining normal watch. Over. The radio went silent. I sat in the cabin, the morning light strengthening around me, and I tried to make sense of what had just happened. There was a camp in the forest below me, close enough that I should have been able to see some indication of human presence. And I'd seen nothing. This was troubling for multiple reasons. The first was that it suggested the camp had been silent, dark, and completely invisible, despite being directly in my sight range. The second was that it made me question whether I was actually as effective at my job as I'd believed. The third was something I was hesitant to articulate even to myself. If someone was trying to avoid being detected, there were very effective ways to accomplish that. And if those people had been successfully avoiding detection, what else might they be doing below the forest canopy that I couldn't see? I made another entry in the logbook with detailed timestamps and coordinates. I documented the findings by the ranger team. I noted my lack of visual confirmation and the time gaps when I wasn't actively observing the specific sector. Then I settled into a different kind of watch. Not a search for fire, but a search for explanation. If the camp was there, there should be evidence: smoke from recent fires, water collection activity, trash or discards, movement, something. I concentrated my attention on the coordinates Ranger Castillo had provided, rotating through high magnification binocular scans every few minutes. At high magnification, the binoculars narrow your field of view significantly, but they also allow you to see details that would be invisible at normal sight distance. I examined the forest in that location with unusual care. The undergrowth, tree trunks, shadows between rocks, the way branches lay, the patterns of light and dark that suggest different kinds of vegetation. Around 8 a.m., I saw something, not a campfire, not smoke, but a color that was slightly wrong, a shade of brown that wasn't quite matching the surrounding deadfall and shadows. I raised the Osborne firefinder and took a bearing. The location was approximately 2.3 miles out, bearing 210 degrees. Using the map overlay, I calculated that it was approximately 200 meters from the coordinates Ranger Castillo had provided. I watched the location for a long time. The color never moved, never changed. It remained present and wrongly colored and utterly still. It could have been anything: a tent, a tarp, a piece of equipment. A natural formation that I was simply interpreting as artificial. I logged it. Its possible camp structure. Suspected location 2.3 miles south-southwest. Bearing 210. All further observations will be documented. The day progressed. The forest warmed. The light became clearer. The visibility improved. I continued my normal watch cycle, but with the south-southwest sector receiving proportionally more attention. Around 10 a.m., I decided to climb the exterior observation ladder again to see if higher elevation provided better sight lines into the canyon system where the camp was located. From the observation platform, I could see more clearly into the deeper terrain. the color I'd observed earlier resolved slightly more. It was definitely something constructed, something that didn't belong in the natural landscape. It could have been a shelter of some kind, a lean-to or tarp structure, designed to be minimal, to avoid attention. I made a note. The question that was forming in my mind was uncomfortable. Why would someone construct a shelter specifically designed to avoid aerial observation? The answer was probably simple. They didn't want to be discovered. They didn't want ranger patrols or fire watch operators or anyone else to find them. But why? Poaching is a possibility. Meth cooking is a possibility. People hiding from authorities is a possibility. People conducting activities that are genuinely dangerous to themselves or others is absolutely a possibility. At 11:15 a.m., the radio crackled. Tower 1, this is dispatch. Be advised we've received a report of possible suspicious activity on State Route 299, approximately 8 miles east of your position. A motorist reported seeing a vehicle that appeared to be abandoned on the shoulder. Rangers are being dispatched to investigate. Does not appear to be related to the forest activity, but reporting for your awareness. Over. Tower 1 copy, I acknowledged. Abandoned vehicles happen. Sometimes they're genuinely abandoned because they've broken down and the owner has walked for help. Sometimes people leave vehicles in remote areas for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's part of something larger and more complicated. Tower 1 will maintain observation and report any activity that appears related to the earlier reports. Over. Copy Tower 1. Dispatch standing by. I maintained my watch. The abandoned vehicle on State Route 299 seemed separate from the camp activity, geographically distant and unrelated. But something about the accumulation of unusual events was beginning to create a kind of background anxiety. Reach the unauthorized persons, the silent camp directly in my sight range, the ranger hearing sounds near the old mining road, the abandoned vehicle 8 miles away. Each event on its own could be explained simply. Together they created a picture that was less clear. They suggested that something was happening in the forest below my tower, something that was deliberately avoiding detection, something that was using multiple locations and perhaps multiple methods to remain hidden. Lunch was canned soup. I heated it while continuing to observe the south-southwest sector. The wrongly colored spot that might have been a shelter remained where it was, unchanged and unmoving. I made notes about the weather, wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, cloud formation. The fire danger was moderate, which meant clear conditions and warm temperatures, and the kind of weather where fire could spread quickly if ignition occurred. The afternoon passed into late afternoon. The shadows began to lengthen again. The quality of light shifted. The forest took on that golden tone that happens before evening. I found myself increasingly focused on the area where the camp was located. Not because I could see activity, I couldn't, but because the camp's very invisibility was becoming more compelling to my attention than any obvious indication of presence would have been. Around 4:30 p.m., the radio came to life with a different kind of urgency. Tower 1 dispatch. All stations be advised. We're upgrading forest closure status. 2 new fires reported in the region in the last 4 hours. One approximately 18 miles northeast of your location, and one approximately 12 miles west. Both are being actively suppressed. No immediate threat to your area, but maintaining elevated alert status. All towers will maintain observation for additional fire starts. Over. Tower 1 copy. Maintaining elevated observation. Standing by. The prospect of fire added another layer to everything else. The forest below me, with its invisible camps and unauthorized persons, was not just a landscape where people were conducting mysterious activities. It was also tinder. It was fuel waiting for ignition. And if someone was out there, doing whatever they were doing, the presence of fire would change everything. The evening watch began with increased focus. I moved beyond my normal scanning rotation and began performing more detailed sector analysis. The Osborne Firefinder became my primary tool. And for each quadrant, I would take multiple bearings on suspicious features. A lighter colored area of vegetation, a spot where the canopy seemed disturbed, a location where shadows fell in an unexpected pattern. Most of it resolved into nothing upon closer examination. Some of it remained ambiguous. I was still in this process when, at 6:22 p.m., the radio reported something new. Tower 1 dispatch. We have a report from Ranger Castillo at the base campsite. Rangers have found additional evidence at the camp location. Multiple sleeping structures, food cache, and evidence of a sustained occupation. Ranger Castillo is requesting that you pay particular attention to any movement from that location heading toward the main access roads. And radio silence is in effect for Ranger operations. Do not transmit location information if you receive radio inquiry. Do you copy? Radio silence for Ranger operations. That meant they were worried about someone hearing the radio transmissions and reacting. It meant they thought the people in the camp were monitoring Ranger communication. The possibility that people in the forest were listening to our radio channel, understanding that they'd been discovered, and potentially preparing to move or act in response to that knowledge, created a different kind of tension than before. This wasn't academic anymore. This wasn't wondering about mysterious activity. This was an active situation with real people reacting to real circumstances. Tower 1 copy. Radio silence understood. And they will maintain observation and refrain from transmitting location information. Over. Copy, Tower 1. Standing by. The sun continued its descent. The light continued its transformation. The forest took on the character it has in that moment between day and night when everything becomes possible and nothing is quite certain. And then, at 6:47 p.m., I saw movement. Not the color wrong spot that might have been a shelter. Not ambiguous shadows or uncertain patterns. But actual movement. A figure, or possibly two figures, moving through the lower undergrowth approximately 2.1 miles south-southwest of my position. The movement was quick, purposeful, heading generally west toward the canyon where the creek flowed. I didn't transmit immediately, radio silence was in effect, but I did grab my logbook and note the time, the location, the direction, and the details. Two figures appeared to be human, moving at pace, heading downslope toward water sources. The movement disappeared into denser forest, and I lost visual confirmation. At 6:53 p.m., approximately 6 minutes after the movement ended, the radio crackled with a call from Ranger Castillo directly. Tower 1, radio check. If you've observed any movement in the last 10 minutes, transmit bearing only. Over. So they had some way of knowing that something had happened without transmitting directly. Tower 1, bearing 210, approximately 2.1 miles. Movement ended 6 minutes ago, heading west. Over. Copy, Tower 1. Rangers responding. Maintain observation. Over. Tower 1 copy, maintaining observation. And then radio silence settled again, more complete than before. The forest continued to darken. Arcot, the evening deepened into dusk. I waited, watching, ready to transmit if I saw additional movement. But the forest remained still. Whatever the rangers were doing, wherever they were going, I couldn't see it from the tower. I was simply watching the space where the movement had been, seeing nothing but trees and shadow and the gathering darkness of approaching night. Darkness arrived. Full night this time, truly dark, with cloud cover moving in that made even starlight uncertain. I performed my evening routine, checking batteries, reviewing logs, preparing water and food. But my attention kept returning to the south-southwest sector. That's where the camp was. That's where the movement had originated. That's where something was happening that I wasn't fully understanding. At 8:15 p.m., the radio came back to life. Tower 1 dispatch. You would be advised. Ranger operations ongoing in sectors 49er1 through 49er4. Those sector designations covered the entire south and southeast quadrant. Ranger teams are conducting thorough investigation and may be transmitting on Ranger channel. Do not be alarmed by increased radio traffic. Over. Tower 1 copy, Ranger operations noted. I settled into my chair facing south, prepared for a night of watching a landscape where I expected something to happen, even though I couldn't be certain what that something would be. The night deepened. The clouds remained. The forest was absolutely black, beyond my immediate perception. I could see nothing. I could hear only the wind in the tower structure and the static of the radio waiting for transmission. Hours passed. Midnight came and went, when my eyes adjusted as much as eyes can adjust to total darkness. But the forest remained opaque. Around 2 a.m., when the fatigue was becoming profound and my concentration was starting to fragment, the radio came to life with a transmission I wasn't expecting. All stations, this is dispatch. I'm going to need all available resources responding to location 732 Alpha 2 on the main access road. We have a report of a vehicle accident with injuries. Ranger units, hospital dispatch, all available personnel are being routed. Over. The responses came in rapid succession. Rangers acknowledging, redirecting toward the reported location, updating dispatch on their position, and ETA. The resource drain was visible even in the radio chatter. Everyone was being pulled toward the accident on the main road. The forest, suddenly, it had fewer eyes watching it. The situation at the campsite, whatever it was no longer the primary focus of Ranger operations. The attention had shifted elsewhere. I noted this but didn't transmit. The radio silence that had been in effect was continuing, and I wasn't authorized to comment on Ranger operations. But I was aware that something had changed. The forest below me was less watched. The camp was less monitored. Whatever was happening, the circumstances had shifted in a significant way. I maintained my position, maintained my watch, and waited. The night continued. The hours passed. Fatigue accumulated in my system like sediment, building up in layers that my body was struggling to process. I was past the point of actual alertness and into the territory of maintenance wakefulness. I was awake because I was programmed to be awake, not because I was genuinely alert. At 3:27 a.m., when I was beginning to consider the serious possibility of allowing myself a brief period of sleep, The radio crackled with dispatch calling me directly. Tower 1, this is dispatch. I'm going to need you to maintain very careful observation of your area. We're hearing scattered reports of movement in multiple sectors, and we're uncertain if all of this is related to ranger operations or if there's additional activity occurring. Can you provide status update on visual observation? Over. I snapped back into alertness with the sudden focus that comes from being directly addressed. Tower 1, stand by. I immediately began my systematic scan, moving through all 4 quadrants with careful attention. Tower 1, I'm performing a scan now, stand by. I scanned north. Nothing visible. I scanned east. Nothing. I scanned west. Nothing. I scanned south and southwest, concentrating on the camp location and the areas where I'd seen previous movement, and I saw something, not movement this time. Light. A faint point of light, barely visible against the darkness of the forest, located approximately 2.4 miles south-southwest, very close to the camp location. I watched for several seconds to ensure it was real and not an optical artifact or an exhaustion-induced hallucination. The light remained steady, faint but definite. Deliberately dim, I thought. Someone was using a flashlight or perhaps a small lamp, and they were keeping it low and shielded. Someone in the camp was moving around, and they were doing it deliberately in the darkness, during the exact window when ranger operations had been pulled away to deal with the vehicle accident on the main road. Tower 1, I'm observing light activity, I reported to dispatch. One light source approximately 2.4 miles south-southwest, bearing 205, appears to be at or very near the camp location. Light is dim, possibly shielded. Over. There was a pause, a longer pause than normal radio delay would account for. Tower 1, can you describe the nature of the light activity? Is it a campfire? Mobile light source? Over. Negative on campfire, I responded. Too dim. Appears to be a handheld or small stationary light source. Light is being moved, suggesting activity. Unable to determine precise nature from this distance. Over. Another pause. But then you, Tower 1, is the light being used by anyone moving toward the main access roads or ranger stations? Over. Negative, I reported. Light appears stationary at approximate camp location. No apparent movement away from the site. Over. Copy, Tower 1. Continue observation and report any change in position or intensity of light source. We're rerouting available ranger units back to your sector. Over. Tower 1 copy. Maintaining observation. I settled in to watch the light. It remained steady, faint, barely visible. It moved slightly. Someone walking around, carrying a light, staying in a relatively contained area. Whoever had the light was not leaving. They were staying at the camp. But why illuminate themselves, even faintly, if the entire point was to avoid detection? Unless they didn't know they could be seen. Unless they believed the darkness was sufficient concealment. Or unless they didn't believe anyone was watching. The light continued for another 8 minutes, and then it extinguished. The forest returned to complete darkness. I maintained my observation anyway, watching the location where the light had been. Nothing further occurred that night. No additional light. No movement. No radio transmissions from ranger operations beyond routine check-ins. The night continued in darkness until the first hints of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon. I was approaching the end of my 48-hour shift. It would be complete at 6 a.m., approximately 7 hours from this moment. I had one more full day in the tower, one more night, and then my time here would be finished. I would descend the ladder, return to civilization. Choi, and whatever was happening in the forest would pass to someone else's responsibility. But something was bothering me. Something about the sequence of events didn't align cleanly. The unauthorized persons, the camp that was visible but also invisible, the movement I saw, the light, the ranger operations, the vehicle accident that pulled resources away at a critical moment, the light appearing only after the rangers had been diverted. It felt like a pattern, even though I couldn't see the complete picture. It felt like something was being coordinated, even though I had no basis for believing that. I was exhausted. That was the primary explanation. I was running on minimal sleep and accumulated fatigue, and my brain was finding patterns in random events, because that's what brains do when they're exhausted and anxious. There was probably a simple explanation for everything. Hikers camping where they shouldn't. A vehicle accident that happened to occur the same night. Equipment and activities that happened to coincide. Coincidence is far more likely than conspiracy. Dawn broke at 6:11 a.m. on my second full day in the tower. The forest transitioned from darkness to gray to the pale light of early morning. I performed my morning scan, documented the night's observations in the logbook, and prepared for the day ahead. I had received no transmission from Ranger Castillo or dispatch indicating that the situation had been resolved. No all-clear message. No explanation of what had been discovered at the campsite. The situation simply remained open and undefined. I made coffee. I ate a granola bar. I settled into my chair and began my normal watch cycle. Unit scan the 4 quadrants. Take bearings on suspicious features. Document what you see. Maintain vigilance. Wait for the shift to end and pass the responsibility to someone else. The morning progressed normally. The forest remained quiet. The light improved as the sun rose higher. No smoke, no obvious fire danger, no immediate threat. But underneath the normal watch cycle, something had shifted in my perception. I was no longer simply looking for fire or surveying the landscape. I was trying to reconstruct what had happened. The camp suggested extended occupation. The food cache suggested preparation. The multiple sleeping structures suggested more than one person. The deliberate camouflage suggested intentional concealment. And the light appearing in the darkness suggested activity that wasn't spontaneous, but rather something that had been planned or scheduled. The timing of the vehicle accident, diverting ranger resources, suggested coincidence or something less innocent. At 10:47 a.m., the radio crackled with dispatch calling me directly again. Tower 1, this is dispatch. I need to provide you with an update on the forest activity situation. Investigation conducted by ranger teams has determined that the campsite contained evidence of extended occupation, but no persons were located at the site when rangers conducted their search. Camp appears to have been evacuated sometime during the evening hours. Do you have any observation of persons leaving the campsite? Over. I reviewed my notes carefully. The movement I'd seen heading west toward the creek. Light. But no observation of persons actually leaving the camp location itself. Tower 1, I observed movement approximately 1847 hours heading west from near the camp location. I also observed a light source at the camp location at approximately 0327 hours this morning. No observation of persons leaving the camp perimeter. Over. Copy Tower 1. The movement you observed at 1847 hours is consistent with ranger observation of persons moving toward the creek valley. Rangers have determined the camp was likely evacuated between 2200 hours and 0400 hours. We're conducting expanded search operations in the creek valleys and lower terrain. Over. So the camp had been intentionally abandoned. The people had moved out, presumably heading deeper into the forest, into terrain where they would be harder to track. Tower 1 copy. Understood. Any continuing observation for additional movement. Over. Copy Tower 1. Dispatch. Standing by. The radio went silent, and I sat in the tower, looking out at the forest, trying to process what this meant. The unauthorized persons had been there. The camp had been real. And when they realized they were being sought, they had moved on. They were now deeper in the forest, further from roads and ranger access, in terrain that was genuinely remote and dangerous. Whatever they were doing, whatever they were hiding from, it was serious enough that they were willing to abandon shelter and move deeper into wild country. The day continued. My shift continued. I watched the forest, documented what I saw, maintained my post. The afternoon brought no new developments. The evening brought no sign of the missing persons or their activity. Then the second night of my shift approached, with the forest settling back into apparent normalcy. I performed my evening routines. I prepared for sleep rotation. I set the radio to full volume. And as darkness fell, I waited to see what the second night would bring. The night was quieter than the first night had been. The cloud cover had cleared and the stars were visible again. The wind had died down slightly. The forest seemed to be settling into an ordinary rhythm. And I, sitting in the tower, felt the weight of the shift bearing down on me. 30 hours into 48, moving toward completion, moving toward the end of responsibility. The strangest thing about the night watch, when nothing happens, is that you're constantly prepared for something to happen, and that state of preparation maintained over hours is its own kind of exhaustion. My body wanted to sleep. My mind wanted to rest. But the protocol required vigilance. Protocol is what keeps people safe when there are fires and emergencies and unauthorized persons in the forest. At 1:34 a.m., the radio came to life one final time. Not dispatch this time, but Ranger Castillo directly. Tower 1, this is Ranger Castillo. I'm transmitting on a different frequency than standard dispatch. Can you receive this transmission? Over. I grabbed the handset. This was unusual. Rangers had specific channels they used for their communications. Them switching to a different frequency suggested they didn't want dispatch to know about this transmission. It suggested something that was happening outside the normal chain of command. Ranger Castillo, Tower 1 receiving. Go ahead. Over. Tower 1, I'm at the Creek Valley approximately 2.1 miles south of your position. I'm here because I've been tracking movement of the persons who evacuated the camp. I want to report something that I think you need to understand. She paused. I waited. The equipment and materials at the camp, the food, the shelter structures, the supplies, they weren't being used by the persons who evacuated. The camp was prepared but dormant. The persons who were in the forest weren't living at the camp. They were using it as a staging point. They were doing something else, somewhere else, and the camp was a base of operations for those operations. Over. The implication settled over me slowly. Are you suggesting the camp was a supply depot? I asked, trying to clarify. Or something else? Tower 1. Mike, I'm suggesting that the persons involved were conducting coordinated activities that required multiple locations. The camp was one location. There are other locations. And I'm calling you because from your vantage point, you may have been observing activity related to those other locations without realizing what you were seeing. The movement you reported heading west toward the creek. That was them leaving the primary location to move to one of the other locations. And the light you observed this morning. That may have been them at a different location, potentially conducting activity that was part of their operation. Over. I felt the full weight of this settle into my understanding. The light hadn't been at the camp. I'd assumed it was at the camp because that's where the movement had been heading. And that's where the Rangers had found the shelter structure. But the light had appeared hours later, after the Rangers had conducted their search, and the resources had been diverted to the vehicle accident. The light could have been anywhere in the 2-mile radius of my observation. Ranger Castillo, are you suggesting they were conducting the primary activities at a location other than the camp? And using the camp as a supply location for those activities? Over. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, she replied. And what I want you to understand is that your observation of that light, that may have been you observing the location where the real activity was occurring. The reason you never saw smoke from the camp or evidence of recent fires is because the camp wasn't where they were spending their time. You were looking at a shelter structure that was prepared but not occupied. But the light you saw, that was them at a different location, and we need to know where that location is. Can you provide me with the bearing and location where you observed the light? Over. I pulled up my logbook. The bearing. 205 degrees, approximately 2.4 miles south-southwest from the tower. Ranger Castillo, bearing 205, range approximately 2.4 miles south-southwest sector. Light was observed at approximately 0327 hours, duration approximately 8 minutes. Over. There was a pause. A longer pause. Tower 1, I'm reviewing the terrain in that location. That's the area above the Cascade pools, on where the creek system forms a series of reservoirs before dropping into the canyon. It's remote terrain, not easily accessible from the main roads, but accessible if you know the hiking routes, and it's a location that would allow for significant activity while remaining hidden from casual observation. Over. Ranger Castillo, what kind of activity are we discussing? Over. The question came out of me before I fully thought through the implications of asking it. There was another pause. A very long pause. Tower 1, I'm not going to speculate on active investigation findings, but I can tell you that we're now running this operation in coordination with state police and federal agencies. The situation has escalated beyond simple unauthorized forest occupation, and you've potentially provided critical information that helps us understand the scope and scale of what's been occurring. Over. Federal agencies, state police. The situation had escalated. The seemingly simple event of unauthorized persons in the forest had transformed into something larger, something that required coordination between multiple agencies, something that warranted Ranger Castillo to break protocol and communicate directly with me on a separate frequency. Ranger Castillo, what should I do? Over, I asked. My voice steady despite the sudden sense of being part of something much larger than I'd realized. Tower 1, you maintain your post and continue normal observation, she said. If you observe any additional activity in the south-southwest sector, you report it to dispatch immediately. You do not transmit location data on the main ranger frequency. You do not discuss this transmission with anyone until you've been formally debriefed and you maintain your shift completion. You have approximately 13 hours left. Maintain observation, maintain protocol, maintain security. Do you understand? Over. Tower 1 copy, I understand. Over. Ranger Castillo copies. Maintain station. Ranger Castillo out. The radio went silent. I sat in the darkness of the tower cabin, the radio still in my hand, and I felt the landscape around me shift in perception. The forest below me was no longer simply a landscape that I was watching for fire. It was the location of some kind of investigation that had escalated to federal level, that involved multiple agencies, that was occurring in the darkness while I watched from above. With the light I'd seen, the movement, the camp, the vehicle accident that had diverted resources, the evacuation, the persons moving deeper into the forest, all of it was part of something that I didn't fully understand and that I wasn't going to understand until after my shift was complete. I continued my watch for the remaining 13 hours. I scanned the south-southwest sector with particular attention. I watched for lights, I watched for movement. I documented everything that I observed in the logbook with timestamp and bearing. And I tried to balance the specific requirement to maintain security with the deeply human desire to understand what was happening. The night continued into early morning. The stars wheeled through their slow arc. The forest remained still and largely dark. No additional lights appeared, as no additional movement was observed. The Cascade Pools area remained dark and hidden, and whatever activity was occurring there, if activity was occurring, remained outside my line of sight. At 6 a.m., my shift was officially complete. Another fire watchtower operator would be climbing the ladder below me soon, bringing relief supplies and taking over the post. I made my final entries in the logbook, documented the entirety of the previous 2 days' observation, including all reported activity, all ranger communications, and all my observations. I reviewed the accuracy of my entries. I ensured the tower was in proper condition for the transition, and I waited for my replacement to arrive so that I could descend and return to a world where the complications I'd observed from above could be processed through official channels. When the replacement arrived at 6:47 a.m., another tower operator, someone I knew in passing named Jennifer, who I'd trained with years ago, she climbed into the cabin carrying her supplies, and I briefed her on the current conditions: clear skies, light wind, elevated awareness situation related to unauthorized persons in the forest. Rangers are conducting operations. Federal agencies may be involved. Maintain observation and report any anomalous activity. She received the briefing with professional nods and noted the key points in her logbook. I handed her the logs from my shift. She scanned through them, noting the timeline of activity and observations. "This is quite a shift," she said, looking up from the logbook. "Any sense of what it was about?" "Over." The protocol was clear. I wasn't supposed to discuss the details. Ranger Castillo had been explicit about that. But I also needed Jennifer to understand that the situation was serious and ongoing. "The details are unclear," I said carefully. "But the situation escalated significantly overnight. Rangers are conducting active investigation. There may be federal involvement. I was instructed to maintain security until debriefing. The key is to maintain careful observation of the south-southwest sector and report any activity immediately. Don't speculate on radio, just observe and report." She nodded, understanding the implications of what I wasn't saying. "I've got this," she said. "You can head out. Safe descent." I gathered my personal items from the tower, the photograph of my sister, the small succulent that had somehow survived, my sleeping bag and personal supplies, and I began the descent. Each of the ladder rungs were familiar from the climb 48 hours earlier, but returning to ground level felt different this time. I was no longer viewing the landscape from above. I was descending into it. I was returning to the world of ground-level perspective, where the forest wasn't a landscape of coordinated patterns and sight lines, but a series of obstacles and unknowns and possibilities. At the base of the tower, a ranger was waiting. Not Ranger Castillo, but a younger ranger I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Ranger Torres and informed me that I needed to accompany him to the ranger station for an official debrief regarding my observations during the shift. We drove in silence through the forest, the familiar roads taking on an unfamiliar character now that I knew activities had been occurring just out of sight. At the ranger station, I was met by a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Special Agent Linda Chen from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What followed was approximately 4 hours of detailed questioning. What did I observe? When exactly did I observe it? Were there any details I'd recorded that I had forgotten to mention? Were there sounds associated with any of the movement? Any additional details about the light I'd observed? Any indication of how many persons were involved? Any indication of what kind of activities they were conducting? The questioning was thorough and methodical, and it became clear through the course of the interview that I was being positioned as a critical witness to something significant. I was shown photographs of the campsite that the rangers had documented, the shelters, the food supplies, the equipment. Nothing was explained to me directly about what had been found or what the implications were, but the items in the photographs suggested preparation for extended occupation. The supplies suggested multiple persons. The location suggested deliberate camouflage and isolation. At the end of the interview, Special Agent Chen informed me that I would likely be required to testify in connection with the investigation, but that all details regarding the nature of the investigation remained sealed and classified until the investigation was formally concluded. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from Special Agent Chen informing me that the investigation had been concluded. She didn't provide details about what had been concluded, but she did thank me for my cooperation and inform me that my obligation to maintain security regarding the investigation was now concluded. I would still be requested not to disclose specific details to the general public, but I could discuss the basic outline with people who had a reasonable need to know. What I eventually learned through a combination of official channels and news reports was that the persons in the forest had been conducting an operation related to the cultivation of controlled substances in a remote location. The campsite had been a supply depot for that operation. The primary growing and processing location had been in the Cascade Pools area, hidden in terrain that was difficult to access and difficult to monitor. The light I'd observed had indeed been activity at that location. In the movement toward the creek had been the evacuation of that location when the persons involved realized that ranger operations were underway and they were being actively searched for. The vehicle accident on the main road had not been a coincidence. It had been a planned distraction, a way to pull resources away from the forest operations so that the evacuation could proceed. But here's what I never fully understood and what has bothered me in the months since that shift ended. If the vehicle accident was planned, if it was a deliberate distraction, then how did the persons in the forest coordinate that activity with the persons who were creating the accident? There would need to have been communication. There would need to have been synchronization. There would need to have been a system that allowed the forest-based operation to coordinate with activities outside the forest. And if such a system existed, if such coordination was possible, then what else might have been coordinated? What other timing might have been synchronized? What other aspects of the operation might have involved people that I had direct or indirect contact with during my shift? I returned to fire watch tower duty several weeks later, but something had changed in how I perceived the work. The forest below is no longer simply a landscape that I'm watching for fire. It's a landscape where I know that coordinated activities can occur, that multiple things can happen simultaneously in different locations, that the information you receive through one source can be selectively provided or deliberately manipulated. It's a landscape where what you see from above is only part of the larger picture, and the parts you can't see might be the most important parts. And sometimes on quiet nights, when I'm at the tower and the forest is still and the radio is quiet, I wonder about the light I observed in the darkness. I wonder if it was actually where Ranger Castillo suggested it was. I wonder if my observation and my report were the actual catalyst that brought the federal agencies into the investigation. I wonder if the information I provided was used to conduct the final operation that concluded the case. Or I wonder if my observation was itself part of a larger coordination. If the light was deliberately visible to me so that I would report it. If the entire sequence of events was constructed in such a way that I would observe particular things at particular times and report them through particular channels. I'm probably overthinking this. The case was closed. The operation was concluded. The persons involved were processed through the legal system. There's no indication that my observations were anything but genuine observation of real activity. But that's the thing about watching from above, about receiving information through secondhand sources, about existing at the boundary between what you can see and what you can't see. You become aware of how much you don't know. You become aware of how easy it would be for information to be structured in such a way that you believe you're observing truth, like when you might be observing something that has been carefully constructed to appear true. The forest continues below. The towers continue to be staffed. The watches continue to be maintained. And somewhere out there, in the landscape, where I once observed a light in the darkness, something that I don't fully understand occurred. Something that required coordination across multiple locations and multiple agencies. Something that was serious enough to escalate to federal investigation. And I was a witness to part of it, though perhaps not to the parts that matter most. The light burned for 8 minutes and then extinguished. The forest returned to darkness, and I remained above it all, watching and waiting, and never quite certain what I was actually seeing.